regardless of how it's priced, whether you've hourly stuff over here and value-based price over here, and you have projects over there, and you have retainers over there, that you can compare all of them in exactly the same way using the same math with this simple pricing framework that we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpas. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. It's Marcel here, and today we are going to be doing another solo cast episode. That means it's just going to be me. And what we're talking about is pricing and scoping. And because I've talked about this so many times in the past, we're going to use an excerpt from a presentation that I gave at an event called the All Agency Summit by my good friend Chris Dubois, where we go through two important things. Number one, the pricing formula that we use with all of our clients to normalize their understanding of margin across everything that they sell. And it works across every single billing model, every single staffing model for project-based or retained work. It's one formula that you can use to understand how profitable is this work and how profitable do we expect it to be when we sell it. And you can compare everything that you sell apples to apples. It really simplifies things and makes it a lot more objective, in my opinion, much better than the hours times rate way of arriving at pricing. And then the next question is, okay, we understand how much we need to charge. What is the best way to charge? Should we charge by the hour? Should we charge a flat rate? Should we charge based on value? Should we do a percent of ad spend? Should we do some alternative pricing model? And we're going to go through a simple framework that you can use to identify the ideal pricing model for any situation. So that's what we're going to cover. Now, there are some visuals as part of this presentation. And so if you're listening to this on audio and you want to see those visuals, you'll be able to find them on our YouTube channel, where we'll have a full version of this with all the visuals that I shared during the presentation. So with all of that, I hope that you enjoy this talk, and I will see you on the other side. Thank you very much, Chris, for having me, and thank you everyone for being here. I have a question for all of you. I would love to hear from you in the chat. Show me some signs of life. My question for you is, what is the best pricing model? That's the question, and that's the question that we're here to answer today. What is the best pricing model? And my aim in today's presentation is to teach you about how to identify the best pricing model for any service that you sell, and how to make sure that you are always pricing your services for profitability, no matter what service you sell and no matter how you price it. And lastly, and most importantly, to be able to compare anything that you sell to anything else that you sell, regardless of how it's priced, whether you've hourly stuff over here and value-based price over here, and you have projects over there, and you have retainers over there, that you can compare all of them in exactly the same way using the same math with this simple pricing framework that we're going to talk about today. So the answer that I often get when I ask, hey, what's the best pricing model? A lot of people will say, oh, it's productized flat rate services, or value-based pricing, or value-based retainers, or something like that. Or maybe I get the answer that, anything but hourly. And let me know in the chat if you've ever heard somebody describe time and materials or billing by the hour as somehow being like the worst thing that you could do in your agency, or that you've heard that it's hard to scale an agency on time and materials, or that you can't be profitable scaling an agency trying to sell on time and materials. If you ever heard something like that, let me know in the chat. That's the kind of thing I hear all the time. Chris says, yep, thumbs up. He's heard that. So here's the problem with that is it's not true. And if it was true, then the biggest consulting firms and agencies on the planet wouldn't be scaling to tens of thousands of employees and doing billions with a B dollars in revenue, almost exclusively billing on time and materials. The entire legal industry wouldn't be running on that billing model. The entire accounting industry wouldn't be running on that billing model. And in fact, the agency industry as a whole wouldn't have run on that billing model for the last 100 years. It's only in the last decade that we really started moving away from hourly pricing and into things like value-based or flat rate pricing, all of which can be good. But the important question that we want to answer today is, which one is right for you based on the services you sell and the unique situation that you are in? And the answer to the question that I asked earlier, which pricing model is the best? There actually is an answer to that. It's the one that gives you the best margin. That's the answer. And so let's talk about how to get to that answer and set yourself up for the right margin, no matter what it is that you're selling. Are you all ready for this? If you're excited to hear about this, let me know in the chat. I know I'm a very demanding speaker. I ask for a lot of engagement, but I'm doing this so that we can all get the most out of this. Chris is ready to go, right? Margin. Margin is what matters. It doesn't matter how you price it. It matters that you make money. Can we all agree on that? So let's start with one very important concept, the difference between pricing and scoping. A lot of times when I talk to agency owners, they're using language like this interchangeably. Scoping and pricing, they talk about it like it's the same thing. And the reason they talk about it like it's the same thing is because often it's happening in the same document, in the same process, and often that same information is shared with the client as it is used internally. But these are two very different exercises. The question of pricing is asking, what will they pay? That's what that's asking. What will they pay? What will they pay? Okay, so that's pricing. How much money will we make for a given thing? And scoping is really the conversation about what will it cost us? And some of the biggest problems that I see when I go and work with agencies on their pricing model is that these two things in the way that they price and scope are intrinsically linked. And what I mean by that is if they go talk to a client and they say, hey, client, we need you to pay us $10,000. And the client says, I don't have $10,000. I only have $8,000. Can you do it for $8,000? What they do is they lower the price to $8,000. But the way that they do it is by going back to the scope and lowering the number of hours in the estimate, even though they haven't actually changed the scope of work. They don't say, yeah, we can do it for $8,000 if we take this, this, and this out. They just go back to the estimate and they lower the number of hours because the way that they come to that $10,000 price is hours multiplied by rate. And those two things are, in their model, intrinsically linked. But the reality is those two things are not intrinsically linked. And what happens when we have this intrinsic link is we lower the price to $8,000. We don't lower the scope, but we pretend that it's going to take less time all of a sudden. We lie to ourselves. We give the client what they want. And this only hurts us as an agency because now we've set a false and unrealistic expectation and we've consciously made that decision when we sold the work. And unfortunately, a month later, when we finish the project and we're doing the retrospective and we realize that we've gone over the budget and we weren't as profitable as we expected, oftentimes we've forgotten that this decision of lowering the assumption about how much time it was going to take to do something was made consciously. And then we're pissed off at ourselves and we think this has been a big failure. But the reality is we planned for that from the start. So the first thing that I want to advocate for is that the only thing that we should be focused on in pricing is delivery margin. And delivery margin doesn't care about time and money in the sense that they're intrinsically linked. It cares about those two things as independent variables. So let's talk about how we calculate delivery margin. Delivery margin is the most important metric in agency profitability. And what this metric is meant to tell us is for every dollar that we collect from a client, how much of it is going to be left over after we've delivered the promise that the client paid us for. So for example, if I get paid for a website, once the website is delivered, how much of the money that I was paid for that website is left over to now pay for my overhead and leave a profit for the business? The way that we calculate this metric is number one, by taking what we call agency gross income or AGI and subtracting what we call delivery costs from agency gross income. And then we divide that by agency gross income. So I'll give you an example of this. If we had a project where we were getting paid $10,000 for our time and we spent $4,000 to get it done, then we would have a delivery margin here of 60% or $6,000 in delivery profit. Okay, so let's define each of these things because that becomes really important as well. Agency gross income is the amount of money that you get paid after stripping out what we call pass-through expenses. And pass-through expenses are the fees that you might collect from a client, but that go straight through your business onto an external vendor that you're not responsible for earning with your time and you're not responsible for the profitability of. So an example of those kinds of pass-through expenses would be things like advertising spend. If a client pays you $15,000 a month to run their ads, and 5,000 of those dollars go to Facebook to pay for ads, we subtract that $5,000 as pass-through, and what we're left with is $10,000 in agency gross income. If you do design for websites, but you don't do any of the development, you always hire a third party for that. That third party development shop is a pass-through expense. If you have to buy stock footage for a video, if you have to hire a production agency to shoot the video, those are examples of pass-through expenses, materials, and et cetera. So what we really want to focus on is after we strip all of that out, how much money is left over that we now need to earn with our time. And the profitability of that is the single most important thing to the business. Then what we want to pay attention to is delivery cost. And this is the direct cost of earning that money. And so the majority of this is going to be the time that our team spends on that work multiplied by the cost of an hour of that team's time. And the way that we calculate that cost per hour is we take a fully loaded salary for an individual and we divide it by the total capacity that we are buying from them in a year. So for most people, that total capacity is 2,080 hours. So as an example, if I have somebody that their total payroll plus benefits, taxes, all that stuff is $100,000, and they work 2,080 hours per year, which is 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year, that's how much time I'm buying from them. I'm not saying they're going to be utilized for all of that time. I'm just saying that's what we're buying their time for. Then their average cost per hour, if anyone's good at math, you can help me out with this. I'm doing it in real time. $100,000 divided by 2080 is $48 an hour. Okay. So if this person was going to spend 100 hours on this project, then we would have a $4,800 cost to deliver. So that is how we arrive at delivery margin. So just to give you an example of this, right? We have this project here. We're getting paid 15 grand, but we have $5,000 in pass through. So our delivery margin, again, 10K minus 4K in costs. I can't draw today. Divided by 10K is our 60% delivery margin. Is everyone tracking so far? Let me know in the chat if this is making sense to you. Now, the thing I want to make clear is this math applies to any unit of work. So if you sell hours, then this is the math you want to run for how much an hour should cost to the client and what your margin is on that hour of time. And if you sell projects, it's all the time and cost that goes into the project and what the client is paying you for that project. So this abstracts to any level of unit of work, but we want to understand what our delivery margin is. So here's a question that I get pretty often. How much delivery margin should I be making on a given piece of work? And the answer to that is the following. You want to work backwards from your profit target. You want to add on what you're going to spend in your business on overhead. And then you generally want to add another 10 to 20% to account for the delivery margin reduction that occurs due to the fact that people don't work 40 hours a week for 52 weeks a year. They get time off, they get vacation, they're not utilized all the time. They have other responsibilities within the business that are not going to be billable. So the general rule of thumb here is, let's say I want to have a 30% profit, okay, in my business. I know that I'm going to spend 30% on my overhead. And generally, agencies are going to spend between 20 and 30%. So here I want to be conservative and I want to spend lots on sales and marketing and I want to buy back lots of my time as an executive. So I'm going to spend 30%. Plus I'll add a 15% buffer to account for time off and vacation and utilization, et cetera. So what this means is I should be targeting a 75% plus delivery margin when I price my projects so that I can pay for all the things that I want to pay for and have the profit margin left over at the end that I would like. So as a general rule of thumb, what we recommend is a minimum target of 70%. Okay, that's the minimum target. All things being equal, if you don't want to go and do the math on how much you spend on overhead and what your EBITDA target is, if you can just target 70% or more, generally speaking, that sets you up for success. So hopefully what this does for everyone is it simplifies the exercise of pricing. So the last thing I want to show is how do you find your target price for any given engagement? And it's really quite simple. You take your delivery cost, you divide it by 1 minus your margin target, and then you add pass-through. So let's say, for example, we have got this project here where we have a delivery cost of $4,000. We want to target a margin of 70%. So we would divide this by 0.3. Then the minimum price that we need to charge for this engagement is $4,000 divided by 0.3. That's $13,000 $334. Okay, so this is what the agency gross income would need to look like on this project. And let's say, for example, we had another $5,000 in pass-through expenses that were going to be applied to this. We would add that. So that gets us to a total of $18,334. So this is the minimum price that I need to charge for this engagement if I want to have a delivery margin of 70%. Are we all tracking with this math so far? This is how to find the minimum price of anything at all, anytime. And if we get some time for Q&A, we can talk about markup, which some people might be wondering about. What if we add markup to this? That is going to flow through to AGI. That's the simple answer. Markup is just a pricing mechanism. It's not a scoping mechanism. Markup is just a way that we try to justify and tell a story about a price to a client. It does not affect these numbers. It only affects these numbers if it affects these numbers, if that makes sense. Do you want some free resources to help you measure and improve your profitability? If you do, then I want to tell you about our agency profitability toolkit, which you can grab absolutely free in the show notes or by heading to parakeeto.com/toolkit. It's packed with training videos, cheat sheets, templates, and all kinds of other great resources to help you start measuring and improving the essential metrics that are going to drive better profitability in your business. And it's helped thousands of other agencies around the world do the same. So I want to encourage you to go and grab a copy of that. And if you'd rather get in the fast lane and just have our team of experts guide you through the process of measuring and improving your profitability, then I want to encourage you to apply for a consultation at parakeeto.com. And with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the episode, and I'll let you get back to it. So let's talk now about, okay, we know what we need to target for margin on anything that we sell. Now, the next important question is, well, how do we determine the right pricing model? Should it be a flat rate? Should I sell hours? Should I do points-based? Should I do a productized service? And the answer to that question lies in understanding two important vectors for the thing that you're selling. And so the first vector is value. So this is what we call the pricing model quadrant. You have some services that are going to have a high amount of value, and you have some services that are going to have a low amount of value. And the value here is not to you. It's not what you think the value is. It's what your client thinks the value is. And depending on who you're selling to, the same service is going to have a very different level of value. So value and considering value and price is not a new concept. We've been talking a lot about this over the last 10 years. And this is largely what this idea of value-based pricing is propped up by, is looking for opportunities to find high value engagements and then trying to leverage that high value to increase your price. Amazing. That's great. So I'll briefly talk about the two things that generally determine where a service falls on this value spectrum. The first is going to be the positioning of your firm. Let's say, for example, I have a graphic design agency. If my positioning is, we are a graphic design agency, then we are immediately putting ourselves in a low value category. And the reason for that is there are 10,000 plus options that I can be compared against as a graphic design agency, because I'm competing with everyone from Canva to IDEO, because I'm putting myself in a very large pool. I have very generic positioning. Whereas if my positioning instead was, I help B2B software companies visually communicate complex data systems using graphic design, I'm still selling graphic design, same service, but that positioning puts me in a much smaller category. So if I happen to be selling to a B2B SaaS company with a complex data system that they need to visualize, their perception of how many options they have to compare me to is much smaller. So that helps to create higher value, is positioning. Really big component. The second component is going to be relative value. And the example I'll use here is if I'm improving the conversion rate of a website by 1%, then the value of that conversion rate improvement is directly attributable to how much revenue is flowing through that business's website. If that business does $1 million a month, the value of that 1% is so much higher than if they do $100 a month. And so we have to consider who we're selling to matters, and the severity and scale of the problem is going to change the amount of value that they perceive in a given service. So there's lots of other things that can impact value, but those are the two primary ones that we tend to see and focus on. So value, that's pretty well understood. But what's the other side of this equation? What should be on this axis that we need to consider when we're determining a pricing model for a given service or product? It's the thing that somehow nobody seems to be talking about in the pricing conversation, but we all inherently deal with as agency owners every day selling services to clients. That component is risk. How risky is the work? How well can we predict what it will cost us to actually get this done for the client. Because if we remember, the whole basis of this pricing formula is we have to have an understanding of our delivery costs. So how do you price something if you don't know what it's going to cost you? Let's talk about that. So on this end, we have low risk work. And generally the benchmark for low risk work is we can get to within 10 to 20% of the estimated cost to deliver something to a client on a consistent basis. And then over here, we have high risk work. And high risk work might be high risk because there's a lot of unknown unknowns and it's just hard to scope, or it's very custom, or it's very fluid. And sometimes it's high risk because the methodology that we need to use in order to deliver this to the client is actually inherently iterative. So the Agile methodology is a good example of this. The whole concept with Agile is we are going to do 2 weeks worth of work. We're going to learn what we learn, and then we're going to adapt our process and make some changes and then continue to work for another 2 weeks. And we're going to take an iterative approach. And so it's kind of anti-Agile to try and guess up front what is going to need to happen in order to solve the problem. That's called waterfall development, and there's a reason nobody does it anymore. So there are going to be problems in the world and services in the world that require a high risk methodology, or are just going to be very big, complex, hard to scope problems or hard to scope processes. So let's talk about what the pricing model typically looks like in each of these quadrants. First of all, if you have high risk work that is low in value, typically this is when time and materials, the thing you've been told you should never do, actually makes a lot of sense. The first reason for this is you're selling time. And so if you don't know how much time it's going to take, that's okay, because you're getting paid for time. And as long as your margin on that time is 70% or higher, then the game is let's get paid for all the time that we work, and then we have good margins. And it doesn't matter that you're billing on time and materials. And the reason this tends to work well here is because typically low value work requires lower judgment. Lower judgment typically requires lower cost labor, which means you can create the perception of value by having a reasonable average rate. And I actually had a client that we worked on this, and he started closing a lot more business when he started shifting the conversation back to hours, because his team was in the Philippines. He could be very profitable with a $60 an hour average billable rate. And so he was winning deals against other competitors, not because the aggregate price was lower, but because they perceived him to be a better value because his rate was lower. So I know that that's exactly the opposite of all the advice that you've heard about pricing, but it worked in his case because he was selling high risk work that was low value, but he was a very efficient operator. And so we said, why not lean into that and lean into the advantage that creates for you? And his margins were still great. Now, if we move up the value ladder to high value, high risk work, this is when I typically see abstracted time and materials. And so what is abstracted time materials? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. We are abstracting away from hours, and we're generally selling time, but we're doing it in larger increments, either of time or of people. So an example of this would be, instead of selling hours on a project, I would say we are going to do this using a cross-functional team in 2-week sprints. And that 2-week sprint for this cross-functional team is $20,000. And the backlog that we currently have planned is likely to take between 20 and 30 sprints to complete. And the beautiful thing about working in this way is it lends itself really well to complex or fluid projects, especially abstracted time materials, because as things inevitably change and the client asks for new things, instead of like a flat fee project saying, yes, but we need to open up the scope of work and renegotiate it, we can answer everything by saying, yes, and would you like us to do that before or after the other things that are in the backlog? Because again, they're paying you for time. They're not paying you for deliverables. And so as long as you continue to get paid for that time, the scope can infinitely increase, and it doesn't matter. Your margins are baked in. You keep working, you keep getting paid, and the contract is set up to facilitate that way of working together. I know I'm getting over time here, Chris, so let's talk about the other side of things, low value and low risk. This is where we typically see flat fees. And flat fees make sense here because we have low risk, right? So we can arbitrage that. We know what it's going to cost us ahead of time. And so we use flat fees to create the perception of value and take on the risk. So for example, here, if you said, Marcel, can you build me a website? And I said, yeah, that'll be $500 an hour. You might tell me to screw off. But if I told you I can get you a blazing fast website in 2 weeks that's SEO optimized and proven to convert, and it only costs you $5,000, you might say that sounds like a great deal. It's a flat fee. I'm taking on the risk. I might still make $500 an hour because I know how to get this done in 10 hours very consistently, but it doesn't matter to you as the client. So flat fees are a good way to offer low value services that are low in risk. And the trick here is just make sure that you can price the risk in, because what we want to do is fall on the right side of the equation more often than we don't by having the cost get into that range that gets us the margin that we're looking for. And then the last piece here is high value, low risk. This is where value-based pricing really shines. And the main way to do value-based pricing looks a lot like a flat fee. The only difference is when you ask me about the website, instead of giving you a price, I answer with a question. And I say, well, tell me more about your website. How much traffic do you get? How many deals come through that website? What's the average size of a deal? Oh, interesting. If we improved your website's conversion rate by 10%, you would make an extra $1 million this year. Do you think it would be fair to invest 10% of that upside to get that outcome? And now I've gone from charging $5,000 for this website to 10% of $1 million, which is $100,000, because I've anchored the conversation to value. So this is a very advanced thing, but this is where looking for the opportunities to arbitrage value really makes a lot of sense. But again, the important thing here is not just increasing your price, it's increasing it in a way that is disproportionate from the increase in cost so that we can still achieve the right margin. And we need to be able to make sure that we are pricing in the risk. And generally that means we have to have a mature product. And the final form of value-based pricing is outcome-based pricing, where instead of saying, hey, it's $100,000 for the website, I might say, I'll charge you a flat fee of $5,000 to build a website, but I want 10% of every customer that you sell above and beyond what you did last year. And this requires very low risk, not only in the process, but also in our ability to create the outcome. So this is a very, very mature and very advanced pricing model. And it also requires us to have a lot of control and visibility over measuring the impact. So hopefully what this framework has done is, number one, give you a simplified set of math that allows you to assess if anything that you're selling is profitable and profitable enough, and find that minimum price, whether it be for an hour or for a project, and then assess where a given situation lands on this spectrum and identify a pricing model that is best suited to setting you up for success and profitability. With that, I want to thank everyone for being here. I don't know if we have time for questions, Chris, but if we do, leave them in the comments. And if we don't, leave them in the comments and I'll answer them asynchronously anyway. And thanks so much for having me. All right, well, that was the recording from the All-In Agency Summit, all about pricing and scoping. I hope that you found it helpful, and hopefully this helped bust a couple of myths around pricing and really helped simplify it in a way in your mind, so you now have one formula that you can use to base all your pricing decisions on going forward. If you found this helpful, then I want to encourage you to check out the toolkit. It's in the show notes. There's a bunch of free stuff in there that'll help you implement what you learned on this episode, but also more broadly, take a handle on your profitability. And of course, if you have questions, feel free to leave us a comment wherever you're listening to this. We always love hearing from you. I want to thank you for tuning into today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've ever found yourself thinking, man, I get so much value from this podcast, I wish there was something I could do to return the favor. Well, today's your lucky day, because you can leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and it is incredibly helpful. Of course, if you haven't grabbed a free copy of the Agency Profit Toolkit, go and get that. It's got tons of free resources to help you improve your profitability. If you're looking to get in the fast lane and get help from experts to improve your profitability and measure your most important metrics, then apply for a consultation at Parakeeto.com. We'd love to chat with you and figure out how we can help. With all of that, thank you so much for being a listener, and we will see you on the next episode.